Okay, hi everybody, welcome. We are REEB, which is the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. We're going to talk to you about representation, you can see, and who gets heard. My name is Barbara Phillips. I was founding chair of REEB, and now I have my own organisation called Brownstone Communications, and I'm hosting today with my co-host.
Hi everyone, my name is Shannon, founder of Social Disruption, a consultancy helping brands disrupt for good, essentially.
And we are going to talk to you about a few things. That I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, and I'm going to let them, let them tell you the sorts of areas that they're interested in. So we will start off with Cam. I had to think that because you were there a moment ago.
Hello, I'm Cam, or Kamikwa Lake, but most people call me Cam. I am the founder of Colder. We are a B Corp certified, which there are not many B Corp certified Black-owned agencies in the UK. Only 1 in 9. We are a social impact, PR, marketing and comms agency based in London. I'm also the founder of the UK Black Comms Network, which is a network of... I clearly got some fans in the audience, so I'll take it. We are a network of 400 PR, marketing, social media professionals, and our aim is to empower and upskill Black talent so they stay in the industry.
Okay, I think we'll just let them introduce themselves. Okay,
Hello, everybody. Morning. Is it still morning? Yes. I'm Nafisa Norris. I'm the president of Bloom UK this year. I don't know if there are any Bloomers in the room, but we're a community network of senior women in marketing, comms, PR, and a core part of our pillars is to pay it forward. So there's a big mentoring scheme. We also do a lot of fundraising for Women's Aid, our national charity partners, and with Believe, our regional charity partners, and that's part of trying to bridge the equity gap and kind of equality for women in comms. Basically, we've got to champion each other and skills share and support each other through that network. Oh yes, and I'm also head of membership and engagement at the Conscious Advertising Network, where it's sort of human rights meets advertising, and we work with brands, agencies, civil society groups, and policymakers to ensure that effective advertising truly does work for everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Frank Starlings. I'm Chief Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Officer here at Cannes Lions. So I guess my focus is impact and inclusion, certainly at the festival as we see here, but also within our organisation too. So been in the company for just over 3 years now, and prior to that I was a consultant for about 4.5 years, worked with close to 30 organisations on the topic of DEI.
Hi everyone, my name is Koray Kamgoz. I'm the Chief Executive of the Taylor Bennett Foundation. As you can probably hear, we've got a big alumni community, so we've got more than 1,500 people now who've gone through DBF programs and who are now in the industry. And before this, I spent about 15 years working in the communications industry. So most recently, I was at Ketchum, and then before that, I spent a lot of time with professional bodies, CIPR, and also PRCA, where I worked with Barbara to help create the Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. So delighted to be here.
And Cam, I know you wanted to talk about cultural intelligence and storytelling, what that might look like today.
Yeah, I wanted to start here because we all know that, I've been to Cannes 3 times. When I came in 2022, Inkwell Beach existed on the beach. It is not on the beach this year. So that is a really strong example of where the world is now. It's in a very different place to where it was before. And so for Colder, that has meant that we've worked with brands around the brands that really are about it and really think it's important to reach different audiences, as well as reaching mainstream audiences, are still working with us. And so we're really lucky from that perspective. If I give you an example of what I think culturally intelligent storytelling looks like, we have an ICE model at Colder. I could do with some ice right now. And the I is for immersion. So it's about really understanding who your target audience is. But it's not about demographic data. We call it worldview data. Like, how do people see the world? How do they live, love, work, and play? Do you really understand that? And what is the cultural truth that marries that with a brand? The second piece, the C, is about community connections, and really leaning into creating with communities, which you hear a lot about, but not a lot of brands really do in an authentic way. And the E is about emotional connections and how you earn attention through storytelling. So I'll give you an example of eBay, who we worked with a couple of years ago. We partnered with Notting Hill Carnival. And it wasn't just let's partner with Notting Hill Carnival. eBay had an authenticity guarantee, which means that the sneakers that they sell are not fake. But most people still think they're fake, or they're not sure if they're going to get something that's not real. And so we thought, if the brief was how do we help them really land that messaging? And for us, that was about partnering with the most authentic cultural moment in the UK, or one of the most, which is Notting Hill Carnival. And so what we did was we partnered with Notting Hill Carnival, we partnered with mass bands, we had a crepe check showing up at Carnival, which was all around sneakerheads. So connecting sneakerheads wanting to be box fresh at Carnival to the culture of what Carnival exists, authenticity and expression. And we work with actual carnivalists who are sneakerheads too. So communities don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of other communities. And if you start there by earning your attention in the right space, the credibility builds from there onwards.
I love that. I've got a question for Frank. I'm just piggybacking on what you shared, Cam. I love that you gave such tangible examples. You have your own framework, and then when you're working with brands, there's tangible things you do. So Frank, just jumping on that actually, yourself as an organization and to inspire others, how can we ensure that conversations around equity translate into real decision-making power inside organizations?
I think it's a really important question. I think many organizations are struggling with this word equity right now, and I'll tell you why. I mean, a couple of perspectives on that. I think the first perspective is we've seen this dissenting wave around diversity, equity, and inclusion almost kind of cloak many, many organizations across the globe, where they're trying to understand, like, how do we navigate this storm? You know, how do we be compliant with any changes that we've seen in legislation across the globe? How do we do that? Certainly the purposeful organizations, how do we do that in a meaningful way that still empowers our people? So if you compare that to a maturity model, so if you can imagine, if we put every organization through a test to identify where are they with their DEI maturity, if you're at the very first stage, which really focuses on compliance, you're not necessarily thinking about equity. You're not necessarily thinking about that word of leveling the playing field, ensuring that everything is balanced. So I think we've just seen organizations that maybe weren't at a point of maturity, and now we are seeing a complete rebrand, a reimagining of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that word of equity has kind of dropped off in the process. So I think my hope is that we are kind of in the era of quiet solidarity. I think there are many, many companies and brands right now, they continue to do the work, but they're also trying to navigate the changes that we are seeing against the backdrop of many disruptive forces, agentic AI obviously being one of them. So it's so important that I think leaders step up, they choose to make inclusive decisions, and they put something like equity back onto the table, but in a very thoughtful way, like avoiding any performative measures. So.
And it's interesting, thanks Frank, and it's interesting, and if you notice, we made sure equity was in the name of our board. It's the Race and Ethnicity and Equity Board. So Nafisa, I wanted to come to you. So on Frank's point about maturity, are there, and now we are kind of in the flow of all of this, are there pieces or actions or just, instances that you wish you'd known earlier that you probably do now?
In terms of what I wish I knew earlier, it's the power of building relationships, especially if we're thinking about who's getting heard, and if the opportunities are not coming to you. And with that comes trust. We're in Cannes. You're here to make connections, right? You've got your LinkedIn QR codes. They might be saved in a photo folder. We're all here to make connections. What happens afterwards, right? And that takes time, and you'll kind of resonate with the person behind the job description, and it's that kind of 6 degree of separation of you don't know what opportunities you can land afterwards, and if that can enable you to get heard and kind of try and bridge that equity gap. And with that comes various communities, of which we're all part of here. Volunteering, you've got your CV, you've got your lived experience sort of CV that you'd, I suppose, explain as you're building these relationships. But it's also knowing that, that's not enough in this economic climate, and through building relationships, volunteering, putting yourself out there in various leadership positions, such as myself in Bloom, you've got the kind of testimonials that will work for you. Someone to say, you know what, this person's great to work with because I've worked with them before, and then try and kind of bridge that equity gap, I suppose, somehow, especially in leadership positions. And with that comes visibility and everything else. You've got to do the work, and there's a kind of a human touch that comes there, really. And with that as well, there's, I don't know if you call it sponsorship nowadays. You know, door opening,
Partnerships.
partnerships. You know, all the ships. We're
All the
in
ships,
lots
yeah.
of yachts
Where are the
behind us.
ships?
Exactly, they're all here. Where all the ships are. And sponsorship is a currency that we all have, and it doesn't have to be of monetary value. If it
Exactly
is
that.
of monetary value, please open up your pockets. Please give some money, especially for all the communities do all the great work. But it's what comes easily to you. Is it just an act of kindness, giving someone a hug when they need? Is it making that connection as you do tonight in Empower Cafe, making those introductions, and just who knows if elsewhere someone will introduce you to somebody, and just trying to connect those dots and just ask yourself, if you're not, if you don't have to network, you're not sure what question to ask, just say, hey, this is me, how can I help?
Yeah.
How can I help? And you don't know how that might be, and it might be to help you with work, home, personal, etc. And then see how those relationships thrive, and those opportunities that will hopefully, come your way in the means that they wouldn't, I suppose, they normally would. Waiting for someone to come your way. Just look out for it. Put yourself out there.
No, absolutely, and that's Frank's point about humanity. And I think the whole theme, hopefully, all the talks will not forget the human element of all of this, because that's what EDI is about. Shan.
I actually want to make us a bit uncomfortable. I feel like you can't have these conversations without a bit of discomfort, so I'm going to shake things up. And I want to ask you, Karai, what's one uncomfortable truth around representation that we're still getting wrong in our industry?
To be honest, I think there are a lot. I think there's a lot of different ways you could take this conversation. Certainly from our point of view, I think it's important to realise that the industry is contracting at the moment. Yeah. So there are mergers taking place, there are restructures taking place, there's intense scrutiny and budgets, and all that is taking place at a time when AI is really redefining, reshaping what entry-level work is. And I think the result is that it's never been harder to get your foot in the door in this industry. And what we're now in is fundamentally it's a crisis. So we're in an entry-level crisis. But from our point of view, and to your point, the pain of this crisis isn't being felt equally. So we did some research looking into this a couple of weeks ago. We did a poll with YouGov where we asked more than 2,000 adults from across the UK whether they felt AI was likely to reduce entry-level work. And about 66% said that they did feel that, and that pessimism rose to 84% amongst students. But the really interesting thing was we asked them to rank all the different groups of people that they felt would be most impacted by the changes which are taking place. And at the very bottom of that list, with just 6%, was ethnically diverse young people. And I think from our point of view, what that does is that it shows that people can see that the door on entry-level work is closing, but they're not really thinking about who it is that gets locked out. Because we can see really clearly from the work that we're doing at the Taylor Bennett Foundation that Black, Asian, ethnically diverse, lower socioeconomic professionals are being disproportionately impacted by all the changes which are taking place. And why is that? Well, it's not because of a lack of talent. No. It's not because of a lack of ambition.
Never has been.
Never
has been.
But fundamentally, in my opinion, the reason for it is that success in the communications and PR industry for too long has been about so much more than being good at your job.
100%.
So there's being good at your job, there's nailing your objectives, and there's doing all the work that you need to do. And then there's this whole other stuff, a set of unwritten rules, making sure you've got senior sponsors advocating for you when you're not in the room, making sure that you know how to build those relationships, merchandising your wins. So like when you do have a kind of a moment of success, making sure that that's visible. And that was, to be honest, that was something I saw a lot of when I was agency side. So I think there's all these unwritten rules which sit outside of the day-to-day. And I think they are passed on informally through networks. And too often they just remain hidden to people from diverse backgrounds. So to your point about uncomfortable truth, I think the fact is the industry's always had these big invisible barriers. But I think where we're at the moment with all the changes that are taking place, unless there's intentional action from employers, those barriers are going to get bigger.
Yeah, I think that's worth going back down the line, Frank, if you have anything to add to that, because it's such an important piece, isn't it?
It is truly important, that's for sure. And I think what's interesting is that there are a couple of problems to solve, right? We've got young people coming through who are lacking those access programs, lacking those opportunities to find community, to join an organization, and to get up the runway. And then you've got businesses that are trying to leverage AI in some way, but haven't quite nailed it, right? They're still trying to look at the use cases. They're still trying to better understand where the investment should go. And how do we connect these two industries together, well, these two entities together, the communities and the organizations more effectively? But the private sector and brands out there, they have to step up and fill the gap, right? If we think about the next, we're in a decade of disruption now. A lot is going to change in the future of work. What are we doing to empower young people to come through? Equitable access is key. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, at the festival, we launched something called the ERA program back in 2024. And the focus of that is to provide equitable access to the festival. So we backed €1 million worth of complimentary passes back then. And since then, we've doubled that allowance to €2 million. So we've had over 1,500 people come to the festival, which is one barrier removed, right? It's one barrier to get into the festival itself. And there's still some thinking in terms of, well, how do we get you in front of those stakeholders? But imagine that from a kind of a national perspective, a global perspective. If we're constantly thinking about how we can create access to young people, then that in itself can be a game changer. But if we can couple that with actual opportunities, then we can solve a lot of the problems that we are seeing in businesses today. And I think we should co-design with those individuals, young people that are coming through. They've got unparalleled access to information, to knowledge. And I think it's wrong for us to assume that the best idea may come from people that have been in the business for 20 years. We fundamentally don't know that, right? We have to create an environment that encourages otherwise. So
I think you need to speak, obviously, to Karai offline, Taylor Bennett Foundation. I think that has to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah, shout out to Taylor Bennett Foundation and all the work they do.
And also shout out to the ERA program as well, because I remember I was just speaking to you about this earlier. I came here a few years ago, and even within that time frame, I think that the program has made a demonstrable change to the way people see the festival. So I think Lions deserve immense credit for that as well.
Nafisa, there's something to add to that.
Uncomfortable. I don't know if it's just a British thing, but money, getting paid. I mean, as an industry, I suppose like many, there's the commercial imperative, return on your investment, marketing effectiveness. We're all selling products and services, right? But we don't talk about the widening pay gaps. And with that, with regards to equity, that's been mentioned quite a few times, you've got the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap, the gender pension pay gap, the disability pay gap. I don't know how many holes there are. There are just so many pay gaps. And, if you're kind of thinking of intersectionality, some are falling down, multiple gaps, as it were.
The whole NEET piece
exactly,
as well. The
they're
million young people who are NEET.
Exactly, yeah. And some that aren't even falling. They're just sort of starting from the bottom anyway, because you're not getting those opportunities. But if we're thinking that everyone's equal in this scenario and everyone's got the same microphone, right, trying to say something in these gaps, and again, going back to the headline, who's getting heard? Who is getting heard? Whoever's closest to the top, which is why through, I suppose, jumping on your word there, Karai, it's not even allyship, it's advocacy, right? And if you can sort of build those connections and those relationships, etc., and, community spirit, whoever's on your level can maybe sing from the same hymn sheet, as it were, and, try and shout, then hopefully we can get heard. But then it's ultimately then up to those that can then give you those opportunities to act on it. But it's just, I'm not a statsy gal, so I'll round up. But, I think it was like in the IPA census, found that the sort of ethnicity pay gap, I think kind of is now 19% or so wider than, from 30%. And now
it was definitely about 25% in the
well,
comms
there we
industry.
go. Exactly. And then with
This is
Wackle,
massive.
who wrote a piece in Campaign recently, the gender pay gap has widened now to 11% from 10. It's not widening, it's closing. And yet we're sort of doing all this free labour through various, voluntary activities to try and bridge that gap through skills sharing, as I've said. But who's getting paid and who's getting heard? Who's getting paid to get heard? Yeah.
That as well.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to. For me, there's a positive element in some ways, in terms of where we're at now. In that sometimes EDI and DEI is quite heavy, and also was done performatively. Like for me, a lot of the brands that rolled back, we all were like, that doesn't look real anyway. But then when they rolled back, we were like, why are they rolling back? We knew it was just a trend that they were buying into. And so I guess for me, the uncomfortable truth that I think is an opportunity is that all of the data that was done around the black pound, the brown pound, the value, how much billions of pounds people from ethnic minorities spend, still exists and is still there. You can't put that back in a box. There's still audiences that aren't being reached. And I think our industry has to really make sure it's understanding that and to start thinking more long-term and not short-term. Stop being so cyclical. Because I know there's been certain times in the past when certain groups were really important to the industry. We're gonna be there again. And I know at the moment we're living in the moment, so it feels like, and it is really difficult, there are brands that are about it. So for me, it's really about turning that uncomfortable truths into opportunities. And like I think Frank was saying, there's a lot of brands that are doing it. They're just talking about it differently. They're talking about relevance or resonance. They're talking about communities. And so it's really, really important that we also notice where progress is or is continuing and still is happening, I think, rather than only looking at the negative.
And I would say, staying with you, what about the blind spots? Because what, organisations you describe, when it comes out as performative, clearly there's a blind spot, isn't there? So what would you think there's blind spots in organisations when they're trying to really address equity, if they are actually trying?
I mean, from a comms perspective, it's about, there's a lot of assumptions. There's a lot of extractive behaviour. So we're going to hold this moment or event, come to our thing, rather than co-creating with communities and audiences. And when I say communities, I mean in the broadest sense. That could be a wellness community, a community of passion, community of identity, a global community, a professional network. There's communities is a catch-all term for lots of different types of people convening and being interested in the same thing. And I think a lot of brands are still, because also in a way because of AI and this drive of almost throw it at the wall, see what sticks. We're in a little bit of the moment, put as much money behind it as possible. I think people are also approaching community in that way. They want to do it better, but because they've got this metrics that really match paid media, oftentimes, it doesn't work, and then you don't see the value in the work that you're doing. So for me, it's just really important to set different metrics, set your strategy, go from the outset, and brands that do that will avoid a lot of the blind spots that they're seeing. I also think it's about investing consistently, which a lot of brands didn't do. And I think the other thing is around really understanding when you're speaking to an audience what's important to them. So one of our clients, British Airways, for example, they were doing a lot of the kind of Pride emails and the South Asian Heritage Month and Black History Month. And I was just like, stop doing that. Like, why? That doesn't make any sense. Actually, what's important to those people? For LGBT, Black and Brown community, sometimes it's about being safe in the country, but it's also about joy, or it's about going home at the right time. So you'd be much better communicating to those people when they're booking their flight a year in advance to go home or meet some family, and then doing what you're doing and sending out an email in October for Black History Month when everybody done booked their flights already. So it's just about that. The important thing is really understanding who you're talking to and what makes sense, and actually just avoiding some of the trends and going back to the audiences and the data that you already have.
Oh, lovely. I love that. I love through all you speaking, I think you can see how profound it is, the impact to have communication leaders in these spaces. So you can go, well, hey, client, actually, what about this? And just building upon that, we've got I'm sure we've got leaders in the audience. I'd love for Frank, actually, if you can share tips and actual tangible practical things that leaders can do to ensure that, especially in the kind of comms cultural space, that they can champion more diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, look, I'd always start with co-design. Cam mentioned this point as well. Like that, speaking on behalf of a community, we have to kind of be wary of that, right? There's so much nuance. There's no community out there which is a monolith, and I think sometimes we make an assumption if we are putting out communication about X community that it will represent everyone. Understandably so, we could never do that, right? There are so many different types of nuances that we need to be aware of, but it does start with co-design. If we bring communities into the conversation from the start, then it doesn't need to be performative. So I think that's kind of the first thing I'd always advocate for. I think the second thing is, irrespective of the acronyms, irrespective of what DEI becomes in the future, if it's rebranded and renamed, just go back to this point of, okay, do we have an ethical framework, right? Do we have a way of working based on our values that we believe is important? And beneath that, is that directly tied and connected to the customer that we're trying to serve? Because they're watching, right? They're looking to see how organizations show up in the current moment. And in this era, in this decade where so many organizations will be disrupted, if you don't have that finger on the pulse and you don't actually have a framework internally to drive that decision making, to make sure it's inclusive and impactful, then you'll face a number of challenges. But the opposite is also true, right? If you build that framework from the get-go and you really look at, okay, what capabilities, gaps do we have across our leadership group, as an example? Where are we seeing representation across our workforce? Do we have the right voices in the room when we are making critical decisions? The third point, which I believe to be important on every single organization out there, is the importance of psychological safety. I talk about it all the time. We never know where fundamentally the best idea may come from. But if we create an environment where only the most senior people get heard, or only the people who are in a position of power and privilege are the one that get a voice, then I think you're often creating an echo chamber. If you create psychological safety, you're creating that safe space to say, actually, we are curious about the perspectives in the room. And that, fundamentally, and it's been proven over 25 years of research, that's going to drive innovation, it's going to drive growth, but it's also going to drive a greater sense of inclusion as well, right? If you've got professionals in your company who feel like, actually, I can contribute in a meaningful way, that is what is going to strengthen a company in the years to come. So,
and I think that's a great reminder of why we chose the title, well, why Shannon chose the title, Who Gets Heard, because exactly that. If you want to have a barometer of psychological safety, it's literally who gets heard, isn't it?
Literally,
yeah.
yeah.
Nafisa, anything to add to that? Blind spots or advice for organisations? I know you touched on earlier the sorts of things we can do, but maybe blind spots as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose psychological safety, 100%. But yeah, I don't like the word in my head that's just popping up. It is risk. It's not a risk to invest in ethnic minority groups. It's not a risk to reach the communities that aren't being reached. I think that's the kind of, there are various other risks out there, but reaching, kind of amplifying unheard voices, amplifying unheard stories, tapping into, just communities that aren't being tapped. It's just not, it's not a risk. You'll get rewarded.
Do you know, without chopping you, that's the whole panel you can have on risks, people's definition of what a risk is. Because if you want to shake up the status quo, then it's a risk. If you know the status quo has to be dismantled, so more people, more of the faces in our audience can have a share of what's happening, then it's a massive risk, isn't it? So that's interesting.
So we're quite. So this year, Taylor Bennett has taken several. How many is it? How many mentees do we have?
Well, we kindly were granted 22 passes, I think, through the ERA program.
So we have quite a few. Yeah, woo! How many shares to that? Amazing.
Big up yourself.
We have quite a few mentees, so individuals who are young lions in the audience, so under 30, which is incredible to be at Cannes. We would love for more so yourself, Karai, but also the panel, please do chip in of advice you can give to young lions or the next generation of comms leaders about navigating the space and tips to empower them.
Yeah, I think when it comes to advice, I think you need to start with leaders because I think it's clear that change starts from the top. So the three things that I would really kind of pull out in terms of advice for senior leaders, firstly, and picking up on a few of the other points that were mentioned about co-creation and cultural storytelling, couldn't agree anymore with everything that's been said. I also think there's almost an element before you get to that stage where you need to kind of think very hard about who you are as an organization. Do you really care about this work? If you do, why? And putting in place a demonstrable plan. So for me, and whenever I have these conversations with agency CEOs or directors, it's always just, start where you are, start building a picture of your organization, gather data. Of course, data isn't everything because we all know there are things that the data can't tell us.
6% not feeling the pinch on the...
Absolutely. But I think you get a clear picture of where, like your talent chart. So who's staying in your organization, who's being promoted, who's being rewarded. They're not always the same thing. Who's leaving, and what are they saying when they're leaving in those exit interviews. So like gather all of that information so you've got a clear picture of where you are in the journey. And then I think it's about setting, to Frank's point, about really clear objectives. Say we're going to move from this position, whether it's about representation, whether it's about ethnicity pay gap or whatever it is, we're going to move from here to here by this time, and making sure that every single leader in your organization is versed in that and understands that that is critical to the success of the organization. So if that's not moving the dial, then we are not being successful as an organization and helping them stay accountable. And then the third one I would say is just really just seeking help. Because as I mentioned, in this role, I get to speak to a lot of organizations who are not doing well in this area. And I think something which is often lost on them and surprises them is the fact that there are so many other organizations that are struggling with similar challenges. And so one of the things that we introduced last year was events for senior leaders. So we get agency CEOs and directors into a room, and Cam will know about this because she was a speaker for one of the events. Yeah. But what we do is we get, it's all under Chatham House rule, and you get them to be very open and honest about, okay, what is it about your strategy for attracting and retaining diverse talent? Where are you failing? And I think when they can see that there are other organizations going through similar issues, and also crucially, they get an idea of what good looks like and an idea of what best practice is. So they can actually start to make some changes. I think that is incredibly important because they need to move past that discomfort in order to move into some tangible action. So those are a few things which I think of top of mind for us.
That's great. And let's move back down. So Frank, we've had lots of young people in the audience, and old, but young as well. Let's, what can you say?
Young people, let me speak to you now with the wisdom. Look, I think the first point is becoming brilliant problem solvers. I think that's really, really important. When an organization is going through a number of different changes, and we'll see many companies go through that process over the next half decade, if you're focusing on what problems can you solve, whether it's within the department or industry that you're interested in or expanding beyond that, that's incredibly valuable, right? You can bring that to any company. That critical thinking, that mindset of problem solving, I think is very valuable in itself. The second thing I think is really important is really understanding how that organization operates. You know, a lot of decisions are made, obviously based on the business case, right? Based on the appetite of risk, based on the strategy of that organization. So taking the time to really speak to the senior stakeholders, if you can get 15 minutes in their diary, right? To kind of get that information of, okay, what's important to this company? What are your top 3 strategic priorities? Because that in itself becomes a learning process. It's a learning process because you can get a better understanding of how a business operates, but also the key decisions that are going to influence your career in the future. You're ahead of them. You've got that information. So that puts you right in a pole position when you're trying to apply for a new role within a company. Think about how you're going to perform in that interview because you know the complete blueprint of what's important to that organization and how they operate. So those are my 2 top tips, young people. But yeah, make it happen.
We have great advice. Do you have one, Nafisa?
I just want to say, because it's the younger generation, but they're also slightly older generation that might be pivoting right now, as well. So it's just going back to where in Cannes, the power of building relationships through those connections. Don't be limited to building skills in the job that you're in. If you're employed, try and volunteer to be in different rooms where different skills are being nourished. So looking at my own journey, for example, as a case study, being vice chair of governors at my daughter's school, I'm in a boardroom setting where I'm kind of nourishing my strategic thinking. I'm now president of Bloom through volunteering over 4 years now in various leadership positions, gained that trust to now lead the community that I'm so empowered to be part of. And we've got Rowan, SLT, etc. And you can say that actually I'm managing a membership of almost 300 members as opposed to I work in an organization with 6 people. How can you kind of get those skills and examples in your
transferable
basket?
Skills, are we saying that
exactly
word?
The skills for when you seek your next opportunity to actually show that you've got others vouching for you. So it's just look out for yourself. Definitely critical thinking, the kind of humanness, especially with AI. Just what's that lens, what's your unique selling point. Just put yourself out there and just keep learning. Lifelong learning. Yeah.
Can I ask a rogue question? A rogue question. So, Nafisa, you mentioned something quite key about like volunteering and giving back, and I think we haven't really credited our panel enough, because each of these individuals are not just working for the fun of it and because they have a nice salary. I'm pretty sure they do, but you give back, like in your respective fields. You're volunteering on boards, you're organising community groups, you're creating spaces for young people, etc., and you're building cultural intelligence for those moments. It's like real ingrained in your daily life, not just like for your profession. And I wonder if there's like something around like how do you inviting other people in to like build that cultural intelligence, because you can't really market to people or be involved in people-centric organizations without actually knowing people and being on the ground. I think it's so beautiful, and just like flowers for all you all. But are there advice about how to get involved or support in regards to like volunteering or other ways people can actually build like credibility and cultural intelligence through those different ways?
I say can, if you go for that, and if you answer the advice as well, if you put it together.
Okay, I might forget. But I think in terms of the advice, it's about networking horizontally as well as senior. Like I always say with the Black Comms Network, we've got 10 groups. There's emerging talent, there's founders, there's freelancers, there's people that work in healthcare, there's digital comms. And it's about building your peers, because they're the same people that you're going to be pitching to or working with in the future. So don't ignore the people that are your age, that are coming up, or even not even your age, but in the same stage of their career as you. Because it's really important. And even for me, when I started Colder, it was my network that helped me start. You know, our first client was Oliver Bonus because it was someone that I used to work with. So yeah, really network horizontally, I think, is my key message.
Amazing.
And I've forgotten the
The
question.
voluntary piece. And getting
Oh,
involved in the
volunteering.
community.
I think, I mean, for me, I volunteer, I guess, with Black Comms because it's not a commercial organisation. It's about giving back. I think the way I see it is where it's really challenging to build something for community and also build something commercially too. And sometimes that's challenging for me because sometimes I might get something that actually would be amazing for Colder, but it just doesn't fit with what we're doing with Black Comms and vice versa. But I think having commercial really separate from community is massively helpful. Like I don't need to make money from Black Comms, so I can 100% pull everything into it. Everybody that is a chair of Black Comms, they get a small fee to support us, but they're basically volunteering their time. And they're doing it because they get a lot out of it. They're doing it because it means that they're chairs of organizations, of groups. They're learning different skills. They're learning management skills, et cetera, et cetera. But I think sometimes where the challenge comes is when your commercial and your community are together, and sometimes you just need to pay the bills. And so sometimes you end up doing things that you might not want to do or you're having challenging conversations with yourself and your team. So I know it's not always possible to separate the two, but I think that's what's been really helpful, is that for me, if something comes through the Black Comms inbox, that is for, even if it's a pitch opportunity, that goes out to everyone who might be interested in doing that, or I'll recommend agencies. And if Colder want to go for it too, we'll go for it too. But if it comes through Colder inbox, then it's for me. So yeah, I guess it's that community is really important. And Black Comm, sometimes I'm like, why did I do two things at the same time? It was good in COVID. It's challenging now. But it pays itself back to me in dividends, like being here, knowing you guys, having community and having people that I can talk to, understand our experience. I invest in that community every day for that reason.
That's beautiful. Wow.
Anyone else have anything to add on that? Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up, and we're going to give everyone the opportunity. Rather than do a Q&A, we're going to invite you up and speak to somebody, somebody who's piqued your interest. You can come and say hello, meet and greet, come and say hello. So sort of any more to add in terms of the voluntary and Taylor Bennett Foundation has a lot of that.
So I think, I'll answer it separate from TBF first, because I think anytime you're volunteering, you're building skills that you can't gain in your day-to-day role. So if you're a young person trying to, break through into the industry, or whether you're trying to progress, I think there's always value in doing voluntary work. I agree with Cam's point about separating the commercial and the purpose-driven, because I think it can muddy the water, especially at a time when economically, there's such a strain, and to try and get funding in. So I think that is a valid point. And sorry, the second part of your question.
Really, the voluntary piece and we've done the advice. It's just really the voluntary in the community bit.
Yeah, I think
From
so.
TBF
From a
financial,
TBF point of view, we've got an alumni advisory board. Shout out to Amira, who's fanning herself over there. she's the chair of that group. So we are heavily reliant on volunteers, and we're a super small team, small group of trustees. But we've got a big footprint in the industry because of our people and because of the fact that we've got such a strong alumni community. And we put that board together last year. And really, from my point of view, what I've realized is like greatness is in the agency of others, right? So you need to be able to empower people to do great work. And I think the fact that, you know, all of them are here, they're all doing incredible work in their own rights, in their own organizations. But by de facto, they're also showing the best of TBF as well, because they're showing what TBF grads can go on to achieve. So I'm hugely grateful to everyone who's volunteered time for TBF, because it does make a big difference to our mission.
And before we close, just in case you weren't familiar, so this is Shannon and I are board members of REEB, which is part of the PRCA, and REEB stands for the Race and Ethnicity Equity Board. And we were when we launched it, I was part of when we launched it in 2000, wasn't it? 6 years ago. It really was groundbreaking, and it really was talking about the uncomfortable truth. We almost made it our mandate. People need to be uncomfortable, because if you're going to have a conversation about race, especially in the PR and comms industry, it must be uncomfortable. So if you ever get the opportunity to support REEB, support what we're doing, maybe go onto the website, the PRCA website, and find out what we're about. If you can support us in any way, that would be amazing. Shannon,
I just wanted to say, Barbara, it's actually not the starting, it's that it's still here.
Yeah,
Because
that's
actually
true.
that is
Come
the
on.
biggest challenge for anything that is owned or run by people from minority ethnic backgrounds. So I think it's a clap on the back actually for you being such an amazing chair and member of REEB and fighting the good fight even when people sometimes don't want to listen. But we're still here, and you still, you know, you guys have still put this talk together. So sometimes it's just, I think for me it's just like it's the progress, and it's the fact that you're still here that really should be celebrated.
Thank you, Shannon. Shannon?
Yeah, amazing. So we're going to close, but please do come over and like introduce yourself to the speakers. If you've got any pressing questions, and then please do, we're here for another 5 minutes. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Otherwise,
Thank you all for coming.
so
Thank you so much.
Thanks all.